ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः.
So having completed the first two chapters, Pramod, the audio is okay? So having completed the first two chapters, a little bit of revisit into the fundamentals. The Vedas have two parts. One is called as Karma Kanda. Karma Kanda means the portion dealing with action. The other is called as Jnana Kanda. Kanda means section. Karma Kanda means action section. What is also called as ritual section. Jnana Kanda means knowledge section. Now, why these two sections, Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda? Karma Kanda focuses on Chitta Shuddhi. Chitta Shuddhi means purifying the mind. Jnana Kandam focuses on Brahma Vidya. Brahma Vidya means knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of self. It is only a purified mind that becomes available to pursue the higher. The common belief, especially in our country, in India, is God is great. He will decide when he has to give you spirituality. Till then, destroy yourself. Anyway, one day he'll bail you out. So destroy yourself as much as possible. There our effort is excellent. So no God comes and bestows spirituality. What bestows spiritual seeking is a purified mind, a refined mind. When we say purified mind, many of us may ask this question: don't I have a pure mind already? What's wrong with my mind? Impurity of mind in Vedanta means a mind that is infested with desires and attachment. From this point of view, you see, starting from president of a nation to a farmer, a humble farmer, all of us have desires, all of us have attachments. What we desire and what we are attached only varies. Object of desire and object of attachment varies from a person to person. Suppose I am attached to my guru, which I am. But the Vedas say you should get attached to the higher. So the person who is attached to one's master will look at others and carpet their attachment. You understand? But mind is the same. The mind gets attached. A person may start a NGO and get attached to the title in it. I am the president, I am the director, I am the finance person. Another person starts a firm and gets attached to it. So desires and attachment are the impurity of the mind. Karma kanda means you act in such a way that you don't encourage these impurities. You distill these impurities from the mind. This is karma kanda. Leads to chitta shuddhi. Then the words, statements, declarations in jnana kandam have a deeper impact in us. So where do we start? We have to start with knowledge. We cannot start with action because we are already acting. I'm studying Vedanta, from tomorrow I will start karma. No, we are already doing karma. You're going to work, that is karma. You're running a company, that is karma. You're running a household, that is karma. Knowledge means exposure to higher values of life, subtler ways of living life. What does this knowledge do? There are two results in life. One is the result of profit and loss, the result of joy and sorrow, the result of honor and dishonor. This is one result in life. Businessman is seeking profit and loss result. Seeking profit, avoiding loss. All of us are seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. Seeking joy, avoiding sorrow. Seeking respect, avoiding disrespect. This is one result in life. The other result is the result of punya and papa. Punya means merit. Papa means sin. Irrespective of whether you are seeking profit or loss, pleasure or pain, joy or sorrow, respect or disrespect, punya papa remains the same. You understand? One person is seeking profit, avoiding loss. Another person is seeking respect, avoiding disrespect. But the result of punyam and papam is applicable to all of us. So all scholastic knowledges deal with the first part, the result of profit and loss. When I say profit and loss, all four are taken care of. 4 levels of personality, that's all. But the result of punyam and papam, only scriptures, Vedas bring to our awareness. A business person is ready to go through losses because he doesn't want to incur the sin of hurting others. He says some loss is okay, but I don't want to put into trouble the families that are dependent on me. Another person is so profit oriented, accrues sin, papam. So what is the role of scripture? What is the role of knowledge? To make the invisible visible. What is invisible to us is, am I incurring punyam or papam from the actions that I am executing? Profit or loss doesn't matter. Joy or sorrow doesn't matter. Pleasure or displeasure doesn't matter. Respect or disrespect doesn't matter. Punyam and papam matter. When you start functioning like that, you are doing karma yoga. Understand? Punyam and papam matter. Why? Because any amount of profit, you have to leave it one day. Any amount of losses also has to be written off one day. You depart and the bank has to write off the profits, losses. Right, Divya? Suppose I have $2 million debt, die with no estates, nothing. Don't ask how I got that loan. Just the example. You have to write off when the person is no more. You won't get those debts. But though I have left the $2 million debt unattended, the papam, the sin of having left it unattended comes with me. All the good deeds that the person does in the world cannot be carried forward, but the result of good deeds, which is punyam, is carried forward. When you gain scriptural knowledge, you become aware of something that is invisible to us. No business school teaches. Not even religious institutions teach us. They are supposed to teach us this. So with this awareness of punyam and papam, when you negotiate your choices in life, you are plunging into karma yoga. But this awareness itself requires a lot of knowledge. That elementary knowledge is what we are gaining here. So the Vedas contain two parts, Karma Kandam and Jnana Kandam. The initial process of gaining knowledge, which we are going through, the process of gaining knowledge is complete with reflection, manana. And one of the ways to do manana is, how long you will sit and think about a concept. I'm going to think, I'm going to think, I'm going to think. First thing is we need coffee in order to think. Green tea. What is the practice that is recommended? The practice that is recommended is study, reflection. In reflection, there are many strategies. You think about it on your own. This is the first strategy. The second is you discuss with people who have similar exposure. You don't discuss with your friend in the gymnasium with whom you work out, because that person has no knowledge of Vedanta. You can't discuss with colleague at work because that person may not have knowledge of Vedanta. So you can only discuss in a common forum, which is called satsang. Satsang means company of people who elevate each other. So one of the ways to reflect is, apart from thinking on one's own, discussion, which is what is conducted in the academy. Having gained the basic knowledge, small group discussion, big group discussion, asking questions and finding some inputs from people. So question answer session we have from time to time to clarify the doubts. Today what we are going to see is another way of reflecting, which is called as verse presentation. In the academy, we follow that. Suppose Swamiji teaches 15 verses and then goes on a tour. Those 15 verses, verse by verse, are taken up and narrated by the students in a minute or two. Just capture the important points. And then the group discussion, question answer start. So just to give you an idea of how this process of reflection happens. Since it's the first time, I've picked some people who have participated in discussions before. It's not that they are my priorities or preferences. Just picked up few people who have participated in such forums so that they don't need too much of training. They will summarize a few verses. At the end of the summary, we will take up questions that people have. So we will start from first chapter until the 44th verse of second chapter. And in the next session, we will take volunteers who will repeat it for the remaining verses. And the presenters are being given 3 minutes time. Suppose you have 4 minutes, 5 minutes content, don't worry about it. 3 minutes is just to say that, don't conduct a class. Don't deprive my job. Right? Don't snatch my job away. This is the only thing I know. So we'll do the verse presentation format. Some of you may think, oh, Ranga is not going to take the class, is it? It doesn't matter. The process of reflection is the second step. So don't sign out. It's a very enjoyable experience to listen to your colleagues with whom you are learning their narrations of what they have learned from the verses. And sooner or later, you should also participate. So I've just picked a few people who have participated in these forums earlier. We'll get it started. I think Beni is doing first, right? Yes, please, Beni. Please start the auspicious process.
Hari Om. I will spend a few minutes to present a brief introduction of the Bhagavad Gita and a quick overview of chapter 1, verses 1 to 10. The Bhagavad Gita is the philosophical aspect of the great epic Mahabharat. The essential theme of the Mahabharat centered around the rivalry of a kingdom by two sets of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The 5 Pandavas brothers had moral and virtuous values and were the rightful heir of the kingdom, while the Kauravas brothers, 100 in numbers, were vicious and immoral. Through greed, jealousy, and deceit, Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas brothers, seized the kingdom from the Pandavas, and thus ensued the great battle of the Mahabharat. It was in this state of affairs that Lord Krishna was called upon for support. He gave his entire army to the Kauravas and himself, unarmed and full of wisdom, to the Pandavas. When Arjuna, the great warrior of the Pandavas, broke down on the battlefield and could not fight, Lord Krishna delivered the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita to him. The battle of the Mahabharat is a depiction of what happens to each of us on a daily basis. We are confronted with vicious and virtuous thoughts and actions. Typically, the unrighteous thoughts and actions are more than the righteous. But the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita teaches how to use the few righteous thoughts to defeat the many unrighteous ones, and thereby surmount life challenges. Just as the Pandavas' army, which was only 7 battalions, were able to defeat the large Kauravas' army of 11 battalions, this was the essence of the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is an explanation of Tat Tvam Asi, which means that's thou art, one of the 4 aphorism or Mahavakyas. Just as a breakdown, the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita explain Tvam, thou, which is a self within. The second 6 chapters explain Tat, the supreme God. And the last 6 explain Asi, the self in you and God are one. The knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita consists of Chitta Shuddhi, the knowledge of spiritual development that can provide peace and prosperity in our lives. Brahma Vidya as well, which can take one to spiritual realization. And as we have just heard from Rangaji, he elaborated on Chitta Shuddhi and Brahma Vidya. This is the song of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita. It begins with the word dharma, which means essential being, and ends with mama, which means my. Together it means my essential being. It is our duty to imbibe this philosophy and live it, and perhaps one day we may realize our essential being. Chapter 1, verse 1, Dhritarashtra, the blind king, asks Sanjaya, who was the narrator of the war to the blind king, what are my sons and the sons of Pandu doing? Dhritarashtra had emotions and feeling for his sons, addressing them as my sons, but failed to appreciate the relationship between him and his own brother's sons, as he referred to them as the sons of Pandu. Such a temperament from a king is certainly the breeding ground for war and destruction in any kingdom. Hence, Dharma Kshetra, the divine field, became Kurukshetra, the field of strife, struggle, and conflict. Verse 2 to 10, I encapsulate in this form Duryodhana, the king of the Kauravas, and the emphasis here is on king, shows his ego as he spoke to his teacher Dronacharya, who was also the teacher of the Pandavas. Throughout these verses, Duryodhana boasts of the strength of his army, with many great warriors of renowned capabilities and reputation, and in great numbers of battalion. He claimed his army is far superior to the Pandavas, as it was commanded by one of the greatest warriors of the time, and that is Bhishma. Yet, there was manifestation of fear in Duryodhana's speech, which was on account of his cruel and destructive tendencies conflicting with his inner being. This is the case when our conscience speaks to us. Thank you, and Hari Om.
Hello, Hari Om. This is Krish. Thank you for this opportunity to share the summary of verses 11 to 20, continuing where Baini left off. These verses continue to teach us about how our mind works. As Baini mentioned, first it was about the mind of Dhritarashtra and the mind of Duryodhana. And that's how all our minds work. Verse 11 shows how Duryodhana's selfish mind is full of fear and guilt. Fear because he knows Bhishma will not fight Shikhandi. Guilt because he knows people will not fight for him, so he must invoke the much respected Bhishma to inspire his troops. This contrasts with what Duryodhana said in verse 9 about heroes who have given up their lives for my sake. He knows they will not do this for his sake. He has to invoke Bhishma's name because Bhishma represents the higher values and unselfishness and sacrifice. Verse 12 shows that Bhishma understands Duryodhana's mind because he roars and blows his conch to cheer him up. It actually says in the verse to cheer up Duryodhana. So we know Bhishma understands Duryodhana's mind. Verses 14 through 18, Sanjay's words foretell the disaster for the Kauravas, as if to counsel Dhritarashtra to stop Duryodhana even at this 11th hour, at this very brink of the battle. Every line in these verses points to the Pandavas' righteous victory, such as the reference to King Yudhishthira, the references to the magnificent chariot and white horses, and even down to the references to the names of each of the Pandavas' conches. Then verse 19 says that the sound of the Pandavas' conches shook the earth and the sky. It struck terror in the hearts of the Kauravas. This contrasts with the sound of the Kauravas' conches and other instruments mentioned in verse 13. And then verse 20 brings us to Arjuna's mind, which is calm at this stage, as he has prepared many years for this battle. And he picks up his bow and speaks to Krishna. This verse mentions the monkey ensign, which may refer to his monkey mind that will soon plunge him into despair, asthira chanchala manas, or it may refer to Hanuman, eventually victorious by faithfully serving the ultimate reality. Over to Payal for verses 21 to 30.
Thank you, Krishji. Hari Om, everyone. I will be talking about verses 21 to 30. These verses talk about the emotional state of Arjuna when he sees his family and friends in the army. Up until verse 20, Arjuna was sharp, prepared, with all his faculties available. He was feeling strong enough to fight the battle. Verses 21 to 23, Arjuna asked Krishna to place his chariot between two armies because he wants to assess the enemy. As mentioned earlier by Beniji, in this fight, Pandavas are representing righteousness and Kauravas are representing unrighteousness. Now, one parallel I could draw is that in life, when we are faced with challenge, we must assess the challenge and understand what we are up against. Verse 24 and 25. This is where the first lesson from Krishna to Arjuna is given. Krishna places the chariot between two armies, tactically placing it so that Arjuna can see Drona and Bhishma, because they represent higher values. Krishna wants Arjuna to see that no matter what they stand for, Drona and Bhishma are being good warriors and they are performing their duty to fight. As stated in the verse, Krishna's first lesson made no impression on Arjuna. Verse 26 and 27, Arjuna, instead of seeing opposition in the enemy's army, saw personal relationships. This was a mistake. On a battlefield, a warrior cannot afford to see any personal ties with the enemy. His goal should be to win the war. In Arjuna's case, he was fighting for righteous cause, and the right thing to do would have been to assess the army and to strategize on how to fight. Verses 28 to 30, these three verses talk about how Arjuna's emotions have started overpowering his mind. He tells Krishna that he is unable to fight. His limbs are not working, his mouth is parched. His emotional and physical states continue to deteriorate further. He is losing control of his own intellect. His physical state conveys two messages. The first one is, even a strong warrior like Arjuna can lose his bearings when faced with a challenging situation. Second message is that mental agitations can lead one to not think properly, which further leads to not being able to act effectively. And solution for both these problems is to develop intellect so that it can control the mind and withstand its agitations. And calm mind allows for effective thought through action. I'll pass on to Divya for next set of verses.
At this stage, Arjuna's mind is completely overwhelmed with emotions, and his intellect is unable to confront what's right in front of him. His mental agitations have reached such a fervor that his thinking and acting capacity has stopped. Every effect can be traced to a cause. So in verse 31, there's reference to the law of causation. This law governs the world and is referred to as Brahman or God. At his heightened state of mental agitation, Arjuna is so overcome with fear and anxiety that he sees omens and has become superstitious. In seeking refuge in these hallucinations that don't follow the law of effect and cause, he's resorting to disregard the law of causation and hence the supreme reality itself. Having been considered Dhananjaya, winner of wealth, Arjuna has consistently demonstrated his inherent nature to live a life full of action and desires, winning kingdoms, cherishing accolades of victory. He's demonstrated that he was no recluse. Such a person is now overwhelmed with emotions that he claims in verse 32. He has no desire for winning kingdoms or enjoying pleasure. Krishna, being aware that he is not even true to his own nature, simply waits for Arjuna to continue his emotional outbursts. In continuing to maintain silence, Krishna waits for Arjuna's mental agitations to subside and reason to come clear. In verses 33 and 34, Arjuna continues to slip through the rabbit hole of rationalizing his emotional outbursts, that the people for whom he fights stand in battle ready to sacrifice their lives. Even they won't be there to share the pleasures of life. He sees fathers, teachers, sons, grandsons, brother-in-law, and kinsmen in them. He no more sees the war and confrontation between virtue and vice, but as between families and loved ones. He's bringing his relations, personal feelings to rationalize quitting. From his personal view, in verse 35, he now only sees himself and his relatives and continues to line up his personal reasons to not fight his cousins. As he denounces sovereignty of the three worlds here, he hasn't suddenly attained a state of renunciation, but is speaking from a completely clouded intellect and is trying to create an impression of sacrifice. In verse 36, Arjuna refers to Krishna through this and in various verses through each of the various names given to Krishna, so as to appeal to Krishna's emotional side. In doing so, he uses the term Janardhana in this verse, protector of all beings, while continuing his outburst. He calls Dhritarashtra's sons as desperados, and yet counterintuitively states that he doesn't want to incur sin in killing them. Vasishta's Smritis have described desperados as those committing 6 types of crimes, all of which were committed by his cousins. Yet Arjuna, in his lingering bitterness of those memories, uses the term desperados while referring to them, and yet rationalizes his emotional turmoil with not wanting to incur sin in killing them. In verse 37, in using the term tasmat at this stage, Arjuna means to conclude his business case of sorts, that it's wrong to kill the family and relatives in front of him. Arjuna is declaring here with that word that he knows it all and is firm in his belief and conclusions that it's wrong to pursue with battle, because he is clear on his own joy and sorrow response on the consequences of war. Arjuna's mental state has dragged him from past to future in his emotional rationalization, and in this conclusion has completely ignored his duty and obligation that is in this present moment. Verses 38 and 39 show that with poor discrimination, Arjuna continues to argue that Duryodhana and others have lost their sense of discrimination in their greed for kingdom, while his own illogical conclusions seem very clear to him. He becomes adamant about his opinion. The next 7 verses describe how completely confused Arjuna has become, leading him to collapse in the battlefield. In verse 40, Arjuna refers to values and traditions handed down through generations as vital for communities to thrive. He argues that impiety will prevail when families are destroyed through these killings. He ignores the context of the stories that have led to this moment in war, that communities had already plunged to the lowest level of morality, and that the goal of this war was to resurrect that community. They were at a point in time when only destruction could allow for such a resurrection. With another faulty assumption, Arjuna starts to weave the theory of immorality around the destruction. He loops in corruption of women, intermingling of castes, disruption of society, harmony of the country. He takes his arguments that those responsible for destroying the families, leading to confusion of castes, will go to hell, referring to himself. He refers to future rituals that should continue to be performed for departed ancestors that will cease if these direct descendants were killed. In 43 verse, Arjuna comes a full circle in his arguments that in destroying those in front of him, families will be destroyed, leading to impiety of women, causing intermingling of castes, leading to annihilation of rights, and hence destruction of families. In his disarray of thoughts, he harps about dwelling in hell for an indefinite period if these rituals were not performed. He uses the term dharma, righteousness, Arjuna, as the reason to get out of war, not quite reflecting that that was the same dharma based on which this war was conceived. In this next verse in 45, he deplores the state of greed they appear to be in fighting this war for greed of sovereignty. His sudden shift in line of reasoning shows that his thoughts lack structure and depth, very much like ours, when they are just jumping all over the place because of emotional state. In 46, in a desperate bid to Krishna, Arjuna declares that if Dhritarashtra's son were to slay him, he would rather be killed than to kill them. The whole focus on himself is reconfirmed here in his stance of self-sacrifice. His false sense of renunciation centered on his pleasures, his perceived greed, his sacrifice. In verse 47, Sanjaya concludes this chapter by stating that having thus spoken, Arjuna collapses in his chariot, cast away his bow and arrow, and was distraught with sorrow. His unbridled emotions centered around himself, having created so much mental agitation that the stress of it all becomes unbearable for even a trained and mighty warrior such as Arjuna, who is incapacitated and collapses in the battlefield.
Introduction to chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita and verses 1 to 10 summary. Chapter 2 is titled Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya means number or sequence. Vedanta is Sankhyan philosophy, meaning sequence of logical arguments arriving at a rational conclusion. And the word yoga is derived from the root yuj, Sanskrit, which means to get back to the original state. Every chapter in the Gita, therefore, has the word yoga, constantly reminding us to get back to that state. The first 6 chapters talk about Tvam, thou, the self within, which was elaborated by Beniji. It also represents part of the Vedic aphorism, Tat Tvamasi. These 6 chapters explain how the state of mind that is despondent has the potential to reach a state of mind that can be single-pointed, capable of meditation, and transcending to reach the state of self-realization. Chapter 2 is one of the largest chapters with 72 verses on the knowledge of self. Arjuna in this chapter is in no condition to take any knowledge. Yet it is one of the profound chapters giving out the state of a perfected human being, Sthita Prajna. This is just to wake him up and jolt him, who is distraught, and make him understand the greatness of his friend Krishna. Krishna remains quiet all through the chapter 1 and until the 10th verse of this chapter in terms of giving his sermon. Patiently listening, waiting for Arjuna to surrender and take this knowledge. Thereafter, Krishna gives a blast on the basics of an ungoverned mind and what happens when the intellect fails to govern the mind. The chapter is divided into 6 subtopics, a work done by Swamiji exclusively. And the first 10 verses, the subtopic talks about Arjuna's despondent condition. His personality shattered when his chariot was placed strategically and psychologically by Krishna in front of his guru Drona and the grandsire Bhishma. In the first few verses, strong words are used by Krishna to break Arjuna's whining mind. Krishna asks, "Since when have you fallen to this state, Arjuna? Kutasva kashmalamidam." This is not worthy of an Aryan, who are known to dedicate themselves to the ultimate goal of self-realization. Arjuna right now has fallen to a state where even relative ideals like fame or heaven can't be achieved. Krishna further says, yield not to unmanliness, O Partha, Klaibya mas magama Partha. By using the name Partha, he reminds him of Kunti, which indirectly reminds him of his promise to his mother that he would fight to establish the Dharma. This subtly drives home the point that the battle is not about Arjuna or his desire to fight, or a selfish stance of not fighting his guru or his kith or kin. It is about the greater cause of establishing Dharma. He also Krishna boosts him by calling him Parantapa, meaning scorcher of enemies, a powerful warrior he is, and not to succumb to such weak emotions. Rest of the verses, Arjuna continues to give external reasons of not being able to fight, saying, how could I kill my guru and the grandsire Bhishma? How could I kill my cousins? I better take arms than acquire my desire and wealth. The whole situation has been personalized by him. In verse 6, Arjuna starts to show some signs of confusion. Should I fight them or they should fight me? I won't be in peace after slaying Kauravas, he says. This erroneous conclusion on what ought to be done or not is typical of a Rajasic intellect, whereas all through Krishna stood clear of his purpose, which defines Sattvic intellect. In verses 7 and 8, Arjuna surrenders and admits being overwhelmed with pity and confused, saying, I take refuge in thee. Tell me what to do. Shishyate ham sadi mam tuam prapanna. However, even though he surrenders, he doubts and says, I don't know how I will come out of this grief. My senses are drying up. This is $1 million question that we often ask. How can I elevate myself from grief, depression, despair, and all the maladies of mind? And the answer to this is the sermon by Krishna in this precious Bhagavad Gita, where it establishes how Vedanta can help you lift yourself by yourself from a state of despondency and delusion to a state of perfect mental equanimity. The choice is ours. Do we want to fall in love with our mind and its teaching, or take refuge in a higher intellect or knowledge and elevate ourselves? And then Arjuna, being a warrior par excellence and epitome of dynamic action, declares thus, I cannot fight, and falls. This is because the whole accent of action is upon the little self. Such a state leads to burnout and lack of motivation to work. Having a purpose beyond self-centeredness makes work inspiring, tireless, and provides energy like a car battery. Verse 10 draws a grand conclusion that in between the two armies, Krishna smiles and starts his sermon. The whole Gita is given between the two armies, good versus evil. Remove yourself from these opposites, race with objectivity, stand apart. Then we would be able to see the situation as it is and not as what we want it to be. And then we can perform right action, thus establishing that action per se is neither good or bad. It's the intention behind the action, which is sequentially then decoded in chapter 3 when Arjuna becomes more available. Over to Aparna.
Hari Om. Verses 11 to 30 is generally summarized as the indestructibility of the embodied or the Atman. Verse 11 marks the first time that Lord Krishna gives a sermon to the despondent Arjuna. Krishna addresses Arjuna with some of the highest philosophical truths and begins by describing who a wise person is. He says that the wise person sees life as a whole spectrum and not as individual compartments. The wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. Here it is talking about both the physical dimension of birth and death of the body, but also the birth and death of experiences. The wise do not personalize and become attached to joys or sorrows, and hence do not experience grief, as grief arises due to our own mental personalization. Verses 12 to 13, Krishna teaches us who this I is. The real I is that which enlivens the body, mind, and intellect, and can be equated to electricity inside a light bulb, giving it the power to express light. Contrary to the popular belief, when death occurs, it is the mind and intellect that leaves this body and enters another one, where we have the opportunity to exhaust our remaining vasanas if we choose to do so. But nothing happens to the Atman. And this birth and death process goes on until one merges with the Supreme Self, otherwise known as self-realization. Therefore, the real I is the only permanent entity. In verses 14 and 15, Lord Krishna teaches us to face the pairs of opposites in the world and build intellectual endurance. He highlights the word titiksha, which means having the endurance to face situations, beings, and environments that may be opposed to our preference. Only those who have a balanced mind and a resolute intellect are the ones who can attain immortality. In verse 16, we learned about what is real versus unreal, sat versus asat. Reality is that which existed in the past, that which exists in the present, and that which will exist in the future. And unreality is that which never exists. Just like how a dream feels so real to us while we are in it, we take this waking world to be the ultimate reality. But Lord Krishna tells us that this waking world is neither real nor unreal, but rather an illusion or maya. It is not real because it ceases to exist when we are in dream or deep sleep state. And it is also not unreal because the waking world clearly exists while we are awake. A practical application for us from this verse to segregate real versus unreal is knowing the difference between situations that life presents us with, so the reality, versus interpretations created by our minds that are unreal. Then Krishna gets into describing the qualities of the divine self. While our bodies are said to have an end, the self within does not. The self is omnipresent, unchanging, unborn, and does not die when the body dies. Weapons cannot harm it, and matter cannot affect it. Since the self is a subject of experience, and our senses, mind, and intellect are calibrated to contact objects of the external world, the self still remains unknown to us despite our theoretical understanding of it. Early in spiritual development, it may take something grand like the Niagara Falls or the Grand Canyon to spark the wonderment of God. But as we progress spiritually, we can start to see the divinity within the smallest of things, such as a small flower in the garden. In verse 22, the procession of death and subsequent rebirth is described as a man casting off worn out garments and entering new ones. Krishna says that birth and death are inevitable parts of life, so we should not grieve over that which is inevitable. Like waves arising and merging back into the ocean, beings arise out of the unmanifest state, come into the manifest state for a while, and then return back to an unmanifest state. Therefore, Krishna concludes this set of verses by telling Arjuna that because this indweller in all of us is indestructible, we should not be grieving over any creature. Now I will pass it over to Ishana.
Hari Om, I will be summarizing verses 31 to 44. In the previous verses, Krishna explains why Arjuna should not. Next few verses, he will explain why Arjuna should act appealing to his Kshatriya dharma, essentially Arjuna's swadharma. Arjuna should not be worried about the results of his action. His duty is to perform action in line with his profile, and this war is perfectly in line with his swadharma as a warrior prince, regardless of who is involved or the consequences of such a war. Arjuna wavering on the battlefield is thus comparable to a surgeon wavering if operating on a family member. Directing actions towards desire fulfillment and a focus on results makes one mentally disturbed, whereas action dedicated to a higher ideal results in a reduction of mundane desires. Further, it is not the action itself that can be categorized as inherently sinful or meritorious, whether going to war or performing a surgery. Instead, it is the attitude with which it is performed that accrues punya or papa. Karma yoga can lead to an exhaustion of vasanas. Any effort in this direction, Krishna assures, is never futile. True karma yoga is free from desires. Actions are categorized broadly into three categories: selfish, unselfish, and selfless. Selfish actions sap one's mental energy, causing mental disturbances. Unselfish motives lead to happiness and mental peace. Selfish and unselfish actions, though the first is indeed superior, are both still desire-ridden actions. When actions are fueled by desires, result orientation and a sense of doership are almost inevitable, whereas actions performed without any desires are free from expectation or attachment. Nature is instilled with this beautiful trait. A flower produces fragrance for every passerby, not preferentially. A cow yields milk without expecting a return. Just as a selfless goal ultimately leads to self-realization, fixing an unselfish goal makes the transition to selfless possible. But the mind cannot conceive of a fixed direction because its nature is to waver, propel indiscriminate action, and seek pleasure. Even in religious practice, the mind seeks pleasure. It gets attached to what appeals to the senses, gets stuck in ritualistic performance of religion for material gain, pleasure, and power, fueled by selfish desires. Spirituality, on the contrary, is the awareness with which we perform an action. Such awareness dissolves preoccupation with the external world. Therefore, a person whose actions are rooted in his swadharma, guided by a resolute intellect, free from personal attachments and desires, prepares his mind for meditation. Karma yoga thus leads to the ultimate goal of self-realization.
So we have covered first chapter and the 44 verses of second chapter. What is more difficult than gaining knowledge is to be open to others' perspectives. In all other religions, they talk about religious tolerance, right? In Middle East, in one of the countries, there is a ministry called Ministry of Culture and Tolerance. I wish I could write something to them, but if they write, they'll chop the head. So rather not write. If you have culture, you don't have to tolerate. If a person is intolerant, that means they lack culture. They are opposites. A cultured person is one who can understand the situation from the other's perspective. So according to me, you cannot be right or wrong. A cultured person understands, according to Payal, Payal is right. According to Krish, Krish is right. But if I see Krish and his choices through my lens, through my values, through my desires, I'll also always find mistakes. That is why we say everything is good, but this person. Where is that but coming from? It's coming through the lens of our desires or values. But why is that a person is performing a particular action in that particular situation? From their point of view, if we see, this is called culture. This is called evolution. You don't have to tolerate it. So all other religions talk about tolerance. You tolerate, you accommodate others' perspective. Vedanta doesn't talk about toleration, tolerance. Vedanta talks about understanding. When you understand things, there is no such thing called as tolerance. One of the ways it promotes this quality in us is through Vadam and Vivadam. Vadam and Vivadam is a Sanskrit phrase which means debates and arguments. Arguments and responses. Opinions and rejoinders. Today, no one expressed any opinion. They all stuck to the core content. And it is not right to single any person out. But what was given to Aparna was the toughest portion, 11 to 30. We should have actually broken it into 3 parts or 2 parts at least. But I was more than 500% confident that anyone from Team Satsanga will handle it with ease. It's also a live demonstration for all of us that if the right content is given to the youngsters, parents don't have to complain. The right content my guru gave at the age of 21. So there is no need for the parents to complain. He doesn't go to temple. He doesn't follow our dharma. He doesn't wear a chandan, tilak, kumkum or a bindi. All these complaints parents have. They don't listen to us. They are not like us. In this country, they are spoiled. Why come to that country then? So we make the mistake of taking the immigration and putting the blame of children. So we cannot control these factors, but what is possible is to make the knowledge available. Again, forcing there is also of no use. If we make the knowledge available, anything that is rational, anything that goes along with a scientific process, they are able to take to it. Anything they don't understand, they are unable to relate. So as a parent, we must sympathize that we are offering something they cannot relate to. In school, they are trained logically. Universities, they are trained logically. In religion, when they ask the question, why should I do it? Neither do we know the answer, nor do we direct them to seek those answers. That is where they find themselves stifled. So the group discussion, verse presentation format is a very valuable, in fact, an invaluable way of participating in satsang. Ishana is not attending live. Most of you may know. She has joined the Vedanta Academy for 3 years. Last week, I was hesitant to announce this last Sunday because the situation was such that a trip to India could be cancelled any second due to the virus situation. And we were debating whether to reschedule the flight by a week or a couple of weeks so that we have clarity. And one or two from our own class members, medical experts and people who have information about what is going on, they said, we are not deciding when you should travel, but if you are thinking of traveling in first or second week of January, our opinion is now would be better. We landed here and so many things happened. So Ishana landed in India, and then in a couple of days or in a day, we find that in Ontario, the numbers are going up. So the situation could have worsened. She's reached the academy yesterday, and she wanted to do the program. I said, no, once you go to the academy, you don't attend the classes here. Because her schedule and class started this morning. But since the verse was given to her a few days back, she said, I will complete what I have taken up. I won't leave it. I said, okay, please send the video. And she will narrated it from her Vedanta Academy students' room. She's under quarantine now for 7 days. On 25th, she should be tested, 24th. As soon as she arrived in India, the COVID test revealed negative. But again, for safety of inmates of the academy, 7 days of quarantine for herself too. And then the live classes she will join in a week's time. Her schedule has already started. Today she got a live feed to the lectures. Evening there was group discussion with Swamiji. So sitting in room, she participated. Her course has started. And that is why she sent this video. So I said, you can't attend these classes anymore. Why? She said. I said, because you have gone from Brampton to Brahman. Aparna, I said, I told her, someday if you write a book, this is the title, From Brampton to Brahman. She may write it, who knows? So that is why you had Ishana's presentation on video. She joined the 3-year course. Any question? We don't have any questions sent earlier, but we have some more time. About 15 more minutes we have. If you have any question from the portion we have covered, which is first chapter and 44 verses, we will take those questions first. If there are general questions, we can take up any time after that.
I have one from your introduction to today's class, where you mentioned when there is an action, punya or papa is an inevitable consequence. Now, even those, I have heard from you as well earlier, that they are baggages that you carry. So how do we, now that we know, whether we're capable is another thing, but now that we at least know that, how do we not add to even that baggage in our actions?
Excellent. That is the technique of Karma Yoga. The technique of Karma Yoga is not to gain punya and avoid papa. Right, Divya? The motive in our life is to gain profit, avoid loss. Enjoy pleasure, avoid sorrow. Experience joy, avoid sorrow. Gain respect, avoid disrespect. In that way, the second choice is not gain punya, avoid papa. Karma Yoga is to stay free from both punya and papa. Right? I didn't touch that portion because that's the nerve point of Karma Yoga. When we talk about Chitta Shuddhi, by earning more and more punya, Chitta Shuddhi doesn't happen. So real Karma Yoga or real spiritual evolution means staying away from both punya and papam. Punya means merit, papam means sin. Why is that one should stay away from punya and papa? Sin, papa, we can understand. But merit, punya, why should we stay away from? Because both punyam and papam are born out of your desires. Unselfish, noble, virtuous desires earn you punyam. I want to teach Bhagavad Gita to as many people as possible in North America. Every year, the population of attendees has to become double. And we keep achieving it. What will happen? Next 1,000 years, the person will be taking birth in royal families. Meaning, imagine 94 years of Swami Parthasarthi's life or 94 years of Queen's life. Which one you want? I don't think you will say Queen's life, Benny. 100%. 15 years of Swami Parthasarthi's life is enough for me. I don't want 94 years. What gets you to be a queen who lives 95 years ruling a kingdom? When she walks, everyone gets up. Right? Global respect she earns. What has gained that birth? Punyam that she has done innumerable lives. Noble deeds she has done innumerable lives, but full of desires. Wanting that name, fame, reputation, wanting that punya. What has brought Asha? What has brought Firoz? What has brought Gita Nandini to study Vedanta? Punyam or meritorious services, sacrifices you have done in life without wanting any result. You understand? All of us have done the same punyam, same good actions. But you did it with the idea that this is my duty, this is my obligation. How can I be selfish? When another person is starving, how can I have a feast and party in my house? You understand? In that way, you identify with others and do what you can. This type of satkarma earns you an opportunity to evolve in life. It brings a guru to your doorstep. It brings the Vedas to your doorstep. Even if you are not seeking. You may say, I've never sought it. Aparna may say, I never sought it. I'm only seeking my education in university. This just came and landed on my lap. Nothing comes and lands on your lap. You have done the satkarma without wanting any personal return for it. You understand? When you are performing a satkarma, which is prompted by good desires, unselfish, noble desires, you will get the meritorious results for it, which will give you certain births. Those births, you may say, are definitely better than that of a beggar, that of an economically impoverished family. On paper, they seem very good. But think about it. What is the life of a queen? There are two sons that Prince Charles has, right? Harry and Prince Edward. Who's the second one? The one who renounced the throne is Harry. And then the first son is not worth knowing.
William.
Prince William. Prince William, Prince Harry. Prince Harry said, keep it, I don't want it. I'm not interested. So what brings a person to be born in that royal family? Imagine their life from morning to evening. Where is freedom? What type of clothes they have to wear? What type of opinions they have to speak? What type of public functions and presentations gathering they have to present themselves with? What type of companion they choose? Every aspect of life is dictated by what is called as protocols. A squirrel that hops from one branch to the other in a tree is free. When that type of freedom you seek, you perform satkarma expecting nothing in return. You understand? Why is that you are studying the Bhagavad Gita? Why is that you are sharing this knowledge with others? Not with the good desire and an action that I want to change the world. The same karma, if a person does with innumerable desires, thousands of births, in order to experience the merit. You understand, Divya? When you understand, you may say, I still want that. You won't say, having understood the basics. But anyone would say, I don't want the life of an economically backward family. I don't want to be born to a HIV mother. These are known to us. But who is going to say, I don't want to be born in a royal family? I don't want to be born as son or daughter of Bill Gates. Who's going to say that? So what gets you that birth, if you know? What gets you that birth is innumerable good desire and actions. So desire and action can be of two types. Evil desire and action, selfish desire and action gets you papam, sin. Good, noble desire and action gets you punyam, merit. Karma yoga means karma for the sake of yoga, union with the self. Karma not for the sake of profit or loss. Karma not for the sake of joy or sorrow. Karma not for the sake of respect or disrespect. Karma not even for the sake of punyam and papam. You steer clear of these worldly opposites. Why are you studying the Gita? Chitta Shuddhi. Why are you talking about it? If I don't think about it and talk about it, my mind will think about and talk about certain gross things. Right? So I have to keep my mind clarified and purified. With this idea, you engage into the study. Is it a good action or an evil action? Neither. It's an action that absolves you of goodness and evilness in you, purifies you to reach the real being in you. This type of action is called as Karma Yoga. Punya, Apunya, Vivarjita, Pantaha. In Bhajagovindam, Shankara says, Punya, Apunya. Punya is merit, Apunya is sin. Vivarjita, well relieved. Pantaha, path. This is spirituality. Spirituality is not doing good to others. It is identifying with people. When you identify with people, goodness happens. Evilness dies in you. So Karma Yoga is that technique by which you don't earn punya nor papam. The type of action doesn't matter. You understand? You fire a person from work. How can you not earn papam? Because you are doing your job as a manager in the company. You are selecting your nephew, sister's son for the job. How will you not be commented upon? Because you are choosing the right candidate who happens to be your sister's son. You're not choosing because it's sister's son. You understand? So when you function free from your personal desires, interference of personal desires, you get rid of desires. This is called spiritual path. When you follow this principle in action, it is Karma Yoga. When you follow this principle in emotion, neither attachment nor aversion. I like Vijay Rangan. I don't like Mithali. No such thing at all. Neither attachment takes you to one person, nor aversion makes you avoid the phone call. Oh, that person is it. Say that I'm busy. Neither attachment nor aversion. You are interested in what your profile is, what your role is, what is my duty towards this person. Independent of that, you may say, I like X, I hate Y, but I cannot allow my likes and dislikes to interfere in the relationship. Though I like this person, I'm not going to get attached. Though I dislike that person, I have to get rid of this dislike. I cannot bring it in my relationship. This is Bhakti Yoga. Jnana Yoga is staying away from the pairs of opposites of knowledge and ignorance. That which is beyond knowledge and ignorance is the pure consciousness. You cannot say, I know it. You cannot say, I don't know it. Suppose I ask you, do you know the Atman? You know the body, you know your mind, you know your intellect. Do you know yourself? You say, no. That's not true. You cannot not know the self. All of us know the self, but we know the conditioned self. The conditioned self is the gender. I am Divya, I am Ranga. This is the conditioned self. I am is the unconditioned self. When it becomes Divya, it becomes conditioned. When it becomes Ranga, it becomes conditioned. You understand? So when you are asserting that I am all the time in life, how can you say I don't know the self? When you say I don't know the self, it is the self declaring it. Who's that I? It's like Aparna saying, I don't know who Aparna is. Anyone else in the class can say that, but how can Aparna say that? How can Subhash say, I don't know Subhash? You are Subhash, whether you know yourself or not. There is no Subhash outside you. You are Subhash. But temporarily you can forget. Why? Because you did not sleep well, or you had drink more last evening, which Subhash doesn't do. I know that. Especially Subhash. That's why I picked him up for this example. Or there is a head injury. You've forgotten who you are. But even as you forget who you are who you are. That has not changed. So how is that Punyam and Papam Chitta Shuddhi relieves you from? That's the technique of Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is not to earn Punya, merit. Karma Yoga is not for a luxurious life in future. Karma Yoga is to cleanse the mind of desires, both good and bad, by which your intellect becomes focused on the higher. Now the intellect is trying to fulfill the desires. It is not trying to extinguish the desires. Karma Yoga is the process by which action goes on. You get the material results, but you are not focusing on it. You understand? In the scriptures, epics and Puranas, they have called it as Kalpa Vriksham, Kama Denu. You know that, right? Kalpa Vriksham is a tree under which you stand and pray. It gives you what you pray for. What do you pray for? Kama Denu is a cow. You go and ask, can you give me vegan milk? It gives you vegan milk. A cow that can give you anything that you wish. There is no such tree called Kalpa Vriksham. There is no such cattle called Kamadenu. Kalpa Vriksham and Kamadenu are your Karma Yoga, the knowledge of Vedas. Stand below the tree, you will get what you want. Stand next to the cow and wish, you will get what you want. Or stories narrated to the children. Even Ronak will not take it today, Asha. These stories. He will say, my God, Mom, give me a break. Cow that gives you everything, a tree that gives you everything. Kids won't take it. 7, 8-year-old won't take it. So why is that they gave all these stories? Because when the intellect manifests, you ask, how do I get all that I want in life? Then the question is, what is that all? What do you want? Prosperity from the world, peace from within, evolution for yourself. Karma Yoga gives you all three. If you perform the right action, results will seek you. If you do it with the right attitude, you are peaceful. And if you are performing Karma Yoga, you are getting rid of your existing desires, not acquiring more or fresh, evolving. All three you get in one stroke. Right, Divya? The entire chapter on Karma Yoga, 43 verses, is going to talk about it. Very good. You picked it up, that I left it incomplete there in terms of the relationship between Karma Yogam and Punya Papam, because it's a very long subject, not fitting into chapter 1 and 2. That is why I just left it there. 8:30, right? Yeah. Sorry? So if you have any more questions, please send through the link. And we have the verses for the next week. Can you show? So next week, we will be concluding the second chapter, verse presentation format. Summaries are 45 to 50, 51 to 53, 54 to 57, 58 to 61, 62 and 63, 64 to 68, 69 to 72. So we can have 7 people present. Because of the subtlety of the verses, we have broken it further down. And we got a sample of how the verse presentation happens. If any one of you have a doubt on how these people prepared, you can feel free to ask Swarna or Aparna. Not that you should not ask Beni. What I'm saying is it's easy to reach out to these two. You may already have their contacts in case you need. But any one of you are welcome to volunteer and present these verses. The information will be sent to you. Especially those who have joined the Zoom sessions from last year, who have not participated in the discussion, can give a try. And there is no right presentation, wrong presentation. It is your understanding. Including me, no one's understanding can be claimed as complete. Your humility, I am surviving as a teacher. Okay. So even my knowledge, I cannot say that it is complete. It's better than all of you. There is nothing like that. So don't have this idea that I'm a new student. I don't know whether I'll be right. Forget all that. If you wish to participate, it's your understanding of the verse. It's your process of reflection. So you can volunteer by sending a message to Sarna. And further questions and completion of verse summaries of these 7 subtopics we'll see in the next Sunday class. And from New Year onwards, we should be able to start Karma Yoga.